Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. And as always, if you're liking what you're listening to, like, subscribe, leave some comments, whether this is YouTube or the pod. Join the conversation on our Discord. Anyway, today's episode is about how to restart a campaign that you and your players have shelved for some period of time, how to breathe some life into it, how to get the story going again, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And if you want to jump right to the content, go to the 5-minute mark, and we'll meet you there. Go. Good morning, Chris.
Evening, Jeremy.
Evening. Hello.
Have you done any gaming recently?
Oh, yeah, that. I was going to ask how you are, but you have a bit of a cough, which sounds to me like you have this like crappy lingering cold like I do.
Yeah.
So then I decided not to ask. But have you done any gaming?
I did. We played Warhammer 40,000 Wrath and Glory on Friday night.
And how did that go?
It went well. It goes from being like, well, actually, there was very little combat in it, and then we hit combat, and like Scott was like taken out like straight away. It's like, oh wow, this is really lethal. And I was like reading through the rules to like work out how you could. Like, oh, we missed that rule. That rule would be really useful. Yeah. So it can be pretty lethal, which is kind of the point for the setting.
Yeah,
really.
Sounds like.
And they're playing like proper, like low level schmucks. So they're probably going to die this week, which is the point. Like kill their crappy tier 1 characters. So next time they can play tier 2. It went really well. It's like, it was getting the setting across, and they both like, oh man, this whole thing's like really nasty. And it was like, yes, that was kind of what it was. I'm using it pre-written adventures as well. There's a whole bunch of them. So yeah, it's a good start. We were enjoying that. How about you?
Well, we took yet another week off from Kingmaker, and we will take this coming week off from Kingmaker as well to do a 2-part, not a one-off, but just a 2-session run of Eris, using some of the rules revisions that I've been working on. So this has been the first time I've been able to roll these out with people to test them, and I mean, given the limited use of them, I'm happy with how it's gone. So yeah, people enjoyed it. It worked well. I mean, 2D20, just as you're fond of saying, it just works. They're the core of it, especially for action. It just works. And so yeah, we ran a session of that set in Eris, set in a frontier town there, and I added some meat to that, so there's more stories, more canon growing around it, and it went well. It was a lot of fun. So we'll finish that up this weekend, and they might end up all dead. They might end up captured by the horrific forces of evil. Who knows? We'll find out. But
the forces of evil in Eris, like the elves.
Well, okay, the elves definitely are. The elves are definitely not benevolent. That is but they're utterly convinced that they are, which in some ways makes them even more dangerous than just like nasties. But actually, the forces that the characters have to deal with in this short story arc have nothing to do with the elves. They are other things that are welling up out of the land and causing problems.
I think the elves in Eris are actually the good guys. I feel like they're being misrepresented by their author. Shocking.
No, they're not. They're not.
Colonial bias.
I'm so tired of like these almost deathless things. The elves that are just presented as like, oh, the happy forest people, and they're your it's my 1,000-year-old friend. I'm like, dude, that 1,000-year-old elf is not even gonna look at you like a bug. So I'm writing them accordingly. Anyway, but what I mentioned though, the fact that we actually have not played not Eris. What am I talking about? We haven't played Kingmaker since the end of December.
Oh, that's going to be quite a while then. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because of work travel and like other things going on in people's lives in the group, and then I've been sick, and so that actually precipitated excuse me, my desire to do this episode, because by the time we actually play Eris again, it will have been like 7 weeks. Not Eris. Why do I keep saying that? Kingmaker. By the time we get back to Kingmaker, it'll be in about 7 weeks. So I wanted to pick your mind, because not your brain, because that's gross, about how do we restart? How do you return to a campaign that you have shelved? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I have some ideas, and I want to see what you think about the ideas. And I'm curious what your ideas are.
Yeah. I mean, I have some ideas because again, I had to do this
Yep.
a lot last year because me, Scott, and Brian were doing this. Well,
Yep.
the idea was a rotating thing. So, yeah, when we started, Brian did a session and then we were like, oh, we like that, did a second session. And then I did a session or two and then Scott did it. So by the time we got back to Brian, it had been 3 weeks.
Yeah.
By the time it got back to mine again, it had been 3 or 4 weeks. So, yeah, like almost every time we came back to us, it had been a month or sometimes longer before we played it. So it was constantly restarting
Yeah.
campaigns.
Yeah, so I'm not interested personally in going into like why you shelve a campaign. Like there's all kinds of reasons people do that, but and I'm not interested obviously in the campaigns you shelve with no intention of coming back to them because obviously you're not going to resurrect them if you have no like you don't like them. We're just done with this thing.
Yeah.
But when you've had that several week or maybe longer break, how do you get things going again? Um, I mean, presumably you're going back to it because people are interested in it. And you're interested in it. Everyone looks at each other and goes, "We want to go back to those characters. We want to go back to that place." Or maybe you ended in like a cliffhanger of some sorts, and people are excited about getting back to it and resolving that moment.
One thing, it does make a massive difference how long it's been. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the reality is, it's like, has it been is it in recent enough that people can remember, bits and bobs, or is it actually so long ago that people can't remember, they can't remember anything?
Like beyond broad brushstrokes.
Yeah, and like I think I can remember what class I was, and so it kind of like, how much damage limitation are you going to have to do to sort of paper over the cracks and stuff, because that is a thing. And actually I think you might have to admit, which is not the point of what we're doing, but if it's been so long that you actually can't remember anything,
Yeah.
then at that point you may be questioning, do we even need to carry on with the same characters? Maybe it's just the system we
Yeah.
want to go back to and we could have new characters. Anyway, that's not the situation. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
That is a question you probably should ask yourself before we say, right, we're going to restart. Because I have that. So, for example, in Infinity, we've often said we'd go back and replay Infinity,
Mm-hmm.
but do we really need to go back to the two characters? Because they did die, but in Infinity, death isn't death because
Yeah, it doesn't
they're
matter.
backed up somewhere. They're in the cloud, so they can have new bodies and carry on. But since I suspect that neither of them can remember anything about their characters,
What's the point?
what would be the point? Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I would like. I mean, you can start with. Why don't you start with ideas of what you've got, and I'll then go over what I did last year.
Well, I think this is a campaign with which my players are familiar, but I think that it's important for me to remind them and remind myself. And I think as GM, going through the work of preparing to remind your players serves the purpose of reminding you as well. Like you make sure that you're tuned up and ready to go by going through the process of it's like making a cheat sheet. You know, your teacher says,
Yeah.
"Oh, you can make an index card to use on the test, but only a little one." And so you end up working so hard coming up with ideas to fit on the index card, you end up remembering them. You don't need the index card. I think as GM, when you prep to help the players get their heads about them again, you'll end up doing the same thing for you. For me, I looked at this and I thought my first question, and I already have the answer for Kingmaker, is when you're picking up a campaign, you're taking a campaign off the shelf. Do you start immediately where you left off, or do you start at some other point in time? You could either start after, or depending on how things ended, if you wanted to retcon some things, you could dial the clock back and say, let's undo some of the loose ends where we left off. You know, you go back to the point where everyone was like, okay, now we're all on the same page. I think that's a question you should ask yourself. And more than likely, the norm is going to be we pick up where we left off. And my gut says that you're fast forwarding it some, which I do want to talk with you about. That would be probably like the second most common response. We're going to pick up right where we left off because of the nature of the campaign and what we were doing with it. So that's the first thing I needed to answer. You know,
No, I think that makes it, because the Kingmaker thing you're doing is kind of time dependent. If they've just finished the first book, for want of a better word, the first part of the adventure path, and they've now got like the encampment, then you could jump a month. You can't take a huge jump in time because the whole point is Kingmaker's like almost like real time. Things are always happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, in a lot of other campaigns, my sort of personal thing would be like the longer it has been in the real world, the longer you probably want to make it in game, depending on what's going on. If you've made this thing that there's an evil big army and it's coming in sort of 3 or 4 months' time, then you can't move ahead of you. All right, we're going to pick up 3 months from where we last like, oh, it's too late. The world's been destroyed. But I do think moving it on in real, like in game time, is probably a good idea most of the time, because then it gives you two things. One, it gives you a reason for like why we don't quite remember what happened last time, because it's actually been a while for the characters. Other stuff's happened since then. It also means you get to do fun things at points. You could do flashback episodes. You could actually fill in the gaps. You could give the characters things to do that's happened in the last month or two since they've been there, which gives you some little things to play with and extra things to put. And it may be, because one of the biggest problems with taking a gap is that if you've seeded little plot elements, those plot elements have probably been forgotten now. So then that gives you a chance to like seed new plot elements into the sort of the 2 months that's gone. So yeah, I definitely think I don't like the idea of going back and going, what's the last point we remember? Let's start there. That seems, because people are going to remember different things, but definitely starting where you were up to makes perfect sense. Moving a little bit on,
I think makes well. I know that given the nature of the Kingmaker campaign, the adventure path, we are close to the end of the first book. There are some loose ends and there are some things that they have not done, explored, seen, that they could either do. They can either do those things before the big culminating scene of the book, or they could conceivably do those things afterward. And so what I need to do though is I need to come up with a way to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
So we all remembered where we left off. And that, I think, when you're picking up where you left off, that's really important. So what I'm going to do, and you tell me what you think about this, and we can kick around this as an idea, add some other ones as well, is I'm going to write up a short summary.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty boneheaded, nothing really shocking or groundbreaking about that. I'm going to write about a page summary that is going to say, this was big picture what was happening. This was kind of the direction the party was headed. And this is where we left off. This is what was going on when we left off. And what I think I'm going to do, because of the nature of Kingmaker's not like, it's not like shelving a dungeon crawl campaign where you're in, room N or something like that on the dungeon map. There's a lot of breathing room story-wise and timing built into the Kingmaker story. And so it's not like I have to pick up exactly where we left off. I'll end up picking up within the same week or so, but I still need to write that summary and then provide that to the players. And then what I'm going to suggest that they do is everyone reads it. I'll provide that to them like a week before we reconvene for that game, so that I'm courteous to their use of time. And I'm also going to suggest that everybody reread their character.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I never wrote things out. When we were going back to our D&D campaign last year, what we did most of the time, me and Brian did different things. I would normally just have my notes in the last session. So I'd pretty much just write, right, to remember, you did this thing, you did this thing. Oh, yeah. And I'd do it like a conversation.
You would just, in other words, when you gathered to game, you would just start off with and say, hey, this is where we were.
Yeah. And we'd all go, oh, okay, that would be it. And, the main points. Brian used to do kind of what you did now. He didn't give us it ahead of time, but he would have written a summary, but he would kind of editorialized it. So he'd put his own twist on things, almost like, the narrator. So, like last time, such this thing. So rather than, I would literally just be winging it based on my notes and remembering what I'd wanted to happen and what had happened and just kind of giving a summary. Brian was actually going away and like rewrite, well, not rewriting, because it wasn't, but it was, someone did something stupid and this thing on the heroic blah, blah. So he was putting like a narrator's spin on, and so it was more interesting to listen to going back. Gotcha. Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh, yeah. So that was it, because our sessions aren't super long, so actually usually there isn't too much to remember, and because we'd only done small bits. I mean, that was a difference for us. We weren't recapping months of playtime. It
Right.
was always ever 1 or 2 sessions, but it was 1 or 2 sessions over an
Yeah,
awkward
the
amount of time.
good thing the
And I think
good
that's
thing is
important.
that I've been using the Obsidian Portal website to like write up session summaries, and the characters are people's characters, not necessarily the crunchy bits of the characters, but a little bit of the background of the characters. Those things are posted there. And I have had experiences in the past where, because of the party of players, we have made extensive and really terrific use of the Obsidian portal. But the hard thing is, I can't I cannot expect people to spend time on the game between sessions. I can ask, I can encourage, but I mean, realistically, we've all got lives, we all got things going on, and I'm not going to spend hours upon hours on the thing. So it kind of depends on the people involved in the campaign at that point in time, and like where we are. But the nice thing is that I do have the campaign on Obsidian Portal. So what I can that's where I'll write that summary.
Yeah.
And then if there are things that I need to point back to, like for example, one of the things that's really important in Kingmaker is the hex crawl aspect to it,
Yeah.
which I actually really love. It's a kind of an old school feel. You're mapping out, and exploring these lands, and you're identifying what's in this area and what's in that area. And so we've been keeping track of the hexes that are explored. We have a big old map that's laminated, that's on my game table that we have write on, and stuff like that. It's pretty cool, kind of immersive in that respect. And so what I'm going to do is use the digital version on the Obsidian portal just to remind people, like, these are the areas you've explored. These are the things that you found. These are the kinds of people you've encountered, and the responses that you've gotten from them. And then when we come together, because I can't really guarantee that everyone will have read that summary in detail, like when you assign homework to students, you can't be guaranteed they're actually going to do it before they come to class or at all, that I will go over that again like you would have, and then I'll use the map there in front of us, because I'll send you a picture of it or something. The map is like 3.5 by 4 feet and laminated, and the hexes are like the size of like
Wow.
drink coasters.
Jesus.
It's really cool. So I'll use that as a physical focal point to make sure that everybody's right there. And then I'll take the opportunity also to in the summary that I distribute in advance of our return session, I'll use that summary as an opportunity to push some story elements that I want to be on like the top of their mind when we restart the session. So we'll
I
pretty
think
much start where we left off. Same characters, same everything, and that's what I'll do to remind them.
I think the fact that you've got that campaign, not campaign software, but you've got that campaign organizer thing there to be able to point them all at something, that's really, really useful. Because the fact that like our character shoots were always online, so like before we'd start, like you would say, right, we can meet this Friday. Yes, we would. And Brian would be like, right, well, what character level? So one thing me and Brian would always be doing was going and making our characters for the next session. So we'd always be familiar with our characters ahead of time. The first thing would be like, are we the right level? The awkward ones would be when we'd say we were going to meet and then we didn't, but we'd already done the characters. And then we're like, what character level is it next? Crap, I can't remember. Well, it says there this. Oh, but we might have already said it was that.
Yeah.
But at least going back and looking at the characters beforehand, that was always useful. But yeah, having that kind of, you've got that resource there with all of the stuff that you can point them to go and look at it, and like you said, give them some homework to do. That's really handy to have.
Yeah.
Obviously,
And if if you don't have that, I would just use like a shared document. Just use Google Drive and write up a session summary and just share it to everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, you could share it out to people and share it to them so they can comment on it. And if people had questions, they can just drop comments, and then it's a shared document. Everyone sees the questions that are. And of course, this obviously this goes back to how much time and effort will your players invest in the game away from the session. And that's going to vary by person, by campaign, and by point in time. I mean, there may be times, like for example, one of the guys in my group just started a full-time teaching job. He's teaching high school now, full-time for the first time. So he's busy during the week. And, but yeah, I mean, I think there are plenty of different ways digitally to provide a shared document so that people don't end up asking the same questions time and over again. What about your idea of fast forwarding? And I think your idea of fast forwarding the timeline in the game to match or perhaps reflect, leverage the fact that we took 3 months off from this game. Do we really want to start off exactly where we were?
Yeah.
What would be your judgment call as to how far out to push it, or when to say, yeah, we've been away long enough. I think we're going to push the campaign story along, and maybe do things like, hey, everybody add a level, or something like that. What's your thinking about that? Because I like.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually used this before my final session. So partly, we'd never said how long, but our original idea was we are going to run it for the whole year, and then we decided that we were going to have the whole summer off, so we'd have like lost our train by then. I was like, well, I want to finish my bit, but I knew there was stuff that we needed to do because they'd kind of like got to this point where like the big thing had happened, and then the next thing really they needed to go off and almost like build an army and then have this massive big fight scene with a big army behind them as well as fighting the bad guy. But I didn't have the time to do that, so it was a slightly different reasoning. But it was a kind of, I think, I wanted them to split off. Now, if I had done this in real time, it would have been a couple of sessions, but it would have been a couple of sessions of them doing different things. So actually, I just did it all through Discord and messages. I had them, they literally over the space of sort of 1 or 2 weeks, I would kind of go, well, here's some things you can do. And they would message me, well, I want to do this choice. And then I'd have to do some dice rolling things. And, I would go, right, well, and once they said what they would do, I would kind of roll some dice and say whether things were successful or not. And then I'd give them the consequence. This is what's happened. What you're going to. So they were kind of playing like, kind of a play by post thing that, some people might have done back in the day. But some people still do that now. But, so kind of doing an online play, but literally by post is very slow because things only move as quickly as people respond to the messages. But I used that to sort of move the story on in the background because we hadn't got back to playing the game yet, and I didn't want to. I wanted these separate things to happen, and I leveled them up while they were doing it. It was kind of like, I think, let's hypothetically, they were about level 8 when we stopped, and I really wanted them to be sort of level 12 for the big final thing. So I had them skip levels. They did, like, as they did stuff, and they got extra special magic items, and they recruited these people. And I basically did it all separately. So, when they met up again, it had been, a couple of months in game time, but it was also be a couple of months in real time. And these other things had happened in the background, but they were then totally engaged in what was going to happen when we started again, because we'd had these little stories going on the whole time. We hadn't been meeting in real time doing this, but because I was sending them, I can go back and I had a Discord channel just for Scott, and I had a Discord channel just for Brian.
Yeah.
With all of the things that were happening. So they knew where the characters had leveled up to. They knew what items they'd picked up. They knew which people they'd met on the way. And, they'd had their own little adventures, but it meant they very much knew where they were. They knew what they were doing. They knew what the next big thing was. And this had all happened behind the scenes because I did it, outside of the actual game environment. And so that was a really good way of sort of, when we then restarted and went into this big climactic thing, they were both totally ready for it. They were very up for it. Everyone was like, well, yeah, I've got all these cool stuff I want to use. So yeah, that works great. And I'd recommend that for that kind of thing.
That's a clever way too. I mean, Discord it's easy to set up. Lots of people know how to use it. And especially just as like a text channel. Yeah, you just create separate channels for people that are private, that are just you to them, and you can share some of those secrets. Actually, one of the things that I found when it comes to pumping life back into a campaign that had been shelved is you need your players, at least some of the players, to come in like jazzed and ready to go. And some people they're excited to get back, and they are excited to get back into their character. And so they're going to do that. But one thing that I found, and I'll do this before we pick up Kingmaker here week after this, is I will provide each of the players with some little tidbit, some little secret. Now, the Obsidian portal has this, this posting function that they're basically like blog posts, but you can assign portions. You can add player secrets. So in effect, it has the same sort of function as what a private Discord channel would would do. But I'll try to, I'm gonna sprinkle some things on there so that people show up and they feel like, oh, my character knows something or has some opportunity based on things that are going on, so that it gives them, it gives them an easy way to get going,
Yeah.
so that they can get back into the action and get reconnected to the story quickly, so that we don't spend the first session like mentally wandering. People have a purpose already. I think that's an important piece, whether, and that's whether you're picking up where you left off or you are moving the timeline along. You got to be able, you have to give things people, you have to give people things to do so that the game gets going right away, instead of like this kind of like we're cold and we have to warm up again. There's going to be enough of that already. If you give people a little bit of encouragement and like I said, little kernels or crumbs to go after, that can help get things going faster.
No, I think that's a really good idea. I think that's essentially, I think that kind of covers everything. If the two main things you want, everyone needs to remember what was going on so that they know what they can do next. But also, people need to be engaged. And I think the downside you've got when it's been a big, long time and people have kind of, they're not a bit fuzzy about what was happening, but they also won't be like excited about what happens next. So anything you can do to like, you know, if it's dropping little hints to people or it's actually like running through some things with them separately before they get back in, anything you can do. So the minute you start, you're ready to go. You're like, you know, because when you start a new campaign, like we said, you've made a new character, you're really excited. I want to try this new character out. I want to, you know, and so people are excited. So when you come back, it could be sometimes that people are a bit like, ugh. So actually,
Well,
one nice thing is just to throw people an extra level if it's D&D. If it's something else,
yeah.
you throw people a few XP. So they're excited to try some new shiny toys with their characters
Yeah.
and they're engaged in the plot because you've given them something as well as what has happened. Here's some extra little things that we're
And
going to
especially if
into it.
you move the campaign along a little bit time wise, then you have an opportunity to add those kinds of things. Or maybe there are some questions, you know, figuratively or literally, your characters were trying to answer or get answered, and you just provide those answers to them so that they feel like they've got something already that they can work with. So yeah, I think that the main thing is the summary, and I prefer, I know you said that, like, you know, you do this, like, you know, you sit down and you just talk through it with people. I actually think that something written, whether it's physical or digital, something that people could refer back to, I think that's really helpful. And then yeah, throwing some things at the individual characters so that they feel something, they feel a need and an opportunity, that will wrap them back into the story. And obviously, if you're running a published campaign, go back and read.
Yeah.
That sounds silly, but go back and read. Make sure that you're clear on things. And if it's your own homebrew, I mean, if you've got notes, go back and read your notes. Obviously,
I think the same thing goes to the players because like me and Scott and Brian will, well, Brian won't because his handwriting's terrible, which can't tell his notes. But like me and Scott will take notes when we were players. So that when we started again, we had notes ourselves to refer back to. We didn't have to just rely on like the GM. I think that's another thing you have to bear in mind. Like how do your players take notes and how good is their note taking? Because if they do, the whole thing's a bit easier. You can actually tell them to refer to their notes without having to do too much work yourself. But if they don't take any notes at all, then yeah, you're going to have to do a bit more of the work to,
yeah.
all right, this is what happened. So
I think in
yeah,
an instance like that, if you have players who are not necessarily more passive, but they're there for the action in the session and that's it.
yeah,
I think that you probably should approach something else you should add to your consideration of bringing the game back is think about, like, what did I do that breathed life into the original start, and
yeah.
maybe try to drum up some of that spirit. Now, obviously, this can be complicated by, let's say you are running a dungeon crawl and you did leave off in that room with like that thing going on. Yeah, you've got to figure out a way to either pick up right in the middle of the action, or actually, I would think you just narratively resolve that piece to give people an opportunity to start moving forward again, instead of expecting them to, like, all right, everyone roll initiative, and it's been months.
Well, there we go. There's some handy suggestions at restarting a campaign.
There we go. Okay, so if you have done this, which I'm sure that you have, lots of people have done this. Let us know what you think. Do the like, the subscribe, the get involved, all that good stuff. Leave a comment. If you have some specific tips, we would love to hear them rather.
Happy Valentine's Day.
And that too. Thanks as always for listening. We hope you like this episode. We hope that you like. We hope that you subscribe. We hope that you join the conversation in the comments or on our friendly Discord.